She stood in that lobby with her resume in one hand and her future in the other. 7 months pregnant, dressed in the most professional outfit she could still fit into, and carrying 10 years of expertise in a field that had made other people millionaires. She had rehearsed her answers the night before. She had practiced her smile in the bathroom mirror. She had even mapped out the bus route 3 times to make sure she would arrive exactly 12 minutes early, not too eager, not too late, just right. But the moment she walked through those glass doors, she knew something was wrong. The receptionist looked at her the way people look at something they weren't expecting to see, not with cruelty, exactly, but with that particular kind of discomfort that people wear when they don't know how to hide what they really think. There was a pause, a flicker, a glance down at her stomach and then quickly back up to her face. And in that half second, Maya Collins understood something that no one in that building would ever say out loud. She didn't get the job, not because her qualifications weren't impressive, not because her portfolio wasn't exceptional, not because she couldn't do the work. She had been doing the work, and doing it better than most people in that industry for nearly a decade. She didn't get the job because of what they saw when she walked through that door. She didn't get the job because she was visibly, undeniably, beautifully pregnant, and the man who ran that company had already made up his mind before she sat down. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Maya Collins wasn't just a job applicant sitting in their waiting room. She was the beginning of their ending, and the story of how she got there, how a woman who was abandoned, humiliated, betrayed, and left with nothing, ended up owning the company that rejected her. That story starts not in that lobby, but 3 years earlier, on the night of what should have been the happiest moment of her life. Maya had always been the kind of woman who made things look effortless, which meant people rarely understood how hard she was actually working. She grew up in a modest household in a mid-sized city where ambition was respected but practicality was worshipped. Her mother had worked as a bookkeeper for 20 years. Her father had managed a small hardware store until his knees gave out. They were good people, steady people, the kind of people who believed that if you showed up, kept your head down, and did the work, life would eventually reward you. Maya believed that too. For a long time, she graduated top of her class in business and finance, got her master's on a partial scholarship and 2 part-time jobs, landed a position at a mid-level consulting firm right out of school, and clawed her way up through sheer intelligence and an almost frightening capacity for hard work. By the time she was 28, she was managing accounts worth millions of dollars and had earned a reputation as someone who could look at a struggling business and tell you, within 48 hours, exactly what was bleeding it dry and exactly how to stop it. She was, in every professional sense of the word, exceptional. And then she met Daniel Whitmore. Daniel was the kind of man who filled a room, not because he was particularly tall or particularly handsome, though he was, both of those things in a conventional, catalog-worthy sort of way. He filled a room because he had learned, somewhere along the way, how to make every person in it feel like they were the most important person he had ever met. He had a laugh that made you feel included, a way of listening that made you feel understood, and when he turned that attention on Maya at a charity gala she had attended with a colleague, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Seen, not seen the way her co-workers saw her as a resource, as a brain, as someone useful. Seen the way you want to be seen by another person, like she was worth looking at, worth knowing, worth choosing. She should have paid more attention to the fact that Daniel Whitmore was very good at making people feel exactly what he needed them to feel. They dated for 18 months. He was attentive, generous, romantic in a way that felt genuine rather than performed. He brought her coffee the way she liked it without being asked. He remembered small things, the name of her childhood dog, the way she couldn't eat cilantro, the anniversary of her mother's passing. He met her friends, charmed her colleagues, and won over her father with a firm handshake and an earnest conversation about the hardware business. By the time he proposed, on a rooftop in the city with a skyline lit up behind him and a ring that caught the light in a way that made her breath stop, Maya had already decided that this was the man. She was going to build her life with Shazad, yes, without hesitation. The wedding was beautiful, not extravagant. Daniel had money, significant money. As the co-founder of a growing technology consulting company called Whitmore & Associates. But Maya had insisted on something intimate, meaningful. 100 guests, a venue that used to be a converted library, flowers that her aunt arranged herself. It was exactly what she had wanted. And standing there at the altar looking at the man she had chosen, Maya felt the particular kind of happiness that only comes when you believe, with your whole heart, that you have made the right decision. For almost 2 years, she still believed that. The first sign was small enough to dismiss. It was a Tuesday evening. Maya had come home from work slightly earlier than usual because a meeting had been cancelled, and she had picked up dinner from the Italian place on the corner that Daniel loved. She was setting the table when she noticed his phone on the kitchen counter, screen facing up, lit with a notification she wasn't trying to read but couldn't help seeing. "Miss you already. Tonight was perfect." The name above it said "Ah." Maya set down the serving spoon very carefully. She stood there for a moment, perfectly still. The way you go still when your body knows something before your mind is ready to accept it. Then she picked up the dishes, put them in the refrigerator, and sat down at the kitchen table to wait. When Nanya came home 20 minutes later, he found her sitting there in the quiet. "Hey," he said, loosening his tie. "You're home early. Is everything okay?" "Who is R?" she asked. He didn't miss a beat. He barely blinked, and that, more than anything, told her something. What your phone? There was a notification. From someone named R. It said tonight was perfect. He picked up his phone, glanced at her, and laughed. Not a nervous laugh, a dismissive one. The kind of laugh that is designed to make you feel small for asking. "That's Ryan, from the Henderson account. We closed the deal today. I told you about this last week, Maya." She had no memory of him mentioning Orion, but she also knew she had been distracted, stretched thin between a demanding project at work and the beginnings of what she hoped might be the reason she had been feeling off for the past week. She wanted to believe him. She chose to believe him, but she didn't forget. 6 weeks later, she took a pregnancy test on a Thursday morning and sat on the bathroom floor holding it with both hands, like it was something fragile and irreplaceable. The 2 lines were unmistakable. She sat there for a long time, crying in the way you cry when you are overwhelmed by something that is both terrifying and wonderful, feeling the future rearranging itself around this small, life-altering fact. She told Daniel that evening that he went very quiet. Not the quiet of someone being flooded with emotion. The quiet of someone doing a calculation. "Are you sure?" he said. "I took 3 tests." He nodded slowly, set down his fork, and then after a pause that lasted several seconds too long, he smiled. "Okay," he said, "okay, we'll figure it out." "Not, I'm so happy. Oh, this is incredible." "No, come here, let me hold you, we'll figure it out." Maya told herself later that some people process big news slowly. That shock can look like distance. That he had come around, eventually, that night, had wrapped his arms around her in bed and said the right things. Said he was excited, said it was good news, said they were going to be great parents. She told herself that the initial reaction hadn't meant anything. She was very good, in those days, at telling herself things. The pregnancy progressed, and something shifted in the architecture of their marriage. It was gradual enough that she could always explain any single incident away, but cumulative enough that she began to feel the weight of it even when she couldn't name it. Daniel started working later. She understood the company was in a growth phase, and she knew what growth phases looked like from the inside. He started attending more client dinners that she wasn't invited to, which she also understood, because not every business dinner includes spouses. He became less physically affectionate in a way that she attributed, when she was being charitable, to uncertainty about the pregnancy. Some men went through that, she had read. He became more critical, in small ways, of small things, the way she'd organized the pantry, the amount she was spending on prenatal vitamins, the fact that she wanted to repaint the guest room for the nursery before she had even asked him about it. Looking back, she would understand that what she was experiencing was a man who had already begun to emotionally withdraw from a marriage he had already, in his own mind, decided to leave. He was just waiting for the right moment. He was just arranging the pieces. She didn't know that yet. What she knew was that she was 6 months pregnant, exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness, and increasingly aware that the man sleeping beside her at night felt like a stranger who had learned to imitate her husband. The night everything collapsed was a Friday. Maya had gone to her regular prenatal appointment that afternoon and had been kept longer than expected because of some routine additional monitoring that ultimately turned out to be nothing. She had tried to call Daniel twice and gotten his voicemail. She had sent a text that he hadn't responded to. By the time she got home, she was tired and hungry and vaguely unsettled in a way she couldn't entirely explain, carrying the particular emotional weight of a day that had scared her slightly. and left her wanting the comfort of her husband's presence. She pulled into the driveway at 7:45 and noticed immediately that the light was on in Daniel's home office upstairs. She let herself in quietly. Not because she was trying to be stealthy, simply because she was tired, and the house was quiet, and she was moving through it the way you move through a space that is yours and familiar. She climbed the stairs. She walked down the hallway. The office door was slightly ajar. She heard his voice first. Low, warm, intimate, the specific register of his voice that she had once thought belonged only to her. "I know," he was saying. "I know. I hate it too. But it's complicated, right? No. Just a little longer, I promise. After everything is settled, yes. Yes, I know. Me too." Maya stood in the hallway outside the door of her own home for 30 seconds that felt like 30 years. Then she pushed it. Opened. Daniel looked up from his phone with the expression of a man whose entire carefully constructed world has just developed a crack. He opened his mouth, closed it. The calculation was happening again. She could see it, this time, clearly. "Maya, who are you talking to?" Her voice was very quiet, very steady. The kind of steady that comes not from calm but from the absolute stillness that falls over you when you understand that something is about to change everything. It was a work call. At 7:45 on a Friday night, the Henderson account is, "Don't." Just that. One word. And something in her voice must have told him that the time for small lies had passed, because he stopped. He set the phone down on the desk. He looked at her for a long moment with something that might have been shame and might have been relief, the relief of someone who has been carrying a secret so long that being caught almost feels like mercy. "How long?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. And in that silence, Maya felt the floor of her life shifting beneath her feet. "Maya, it's how long, Daniel? 14 months? She heard a sound that she didn't immediately recognize as coming from herself. Something small and broken, somewhere between a breath and a word. She put one hand on the doorframe. She was acutely, almost absurdly aware of the weight of her stomach, of the child inside her who knew nothing yet about the world they were being born into. 14 months, she repeated. "I didn't mean for it to. Were you together before we got pregnant?" The silence that answered her was the loudest thing she had ever heard. "So you knew when I told you." Her voice was completely flat now. The flatness of something that has been emptied out. "You already knew, and you said we'll figure it out? Maya, I'm sorry. I know this isn't who, is she?" he told her. The name meant nothing to Maya, a woman named Rachel who worked in marketing at a company they partnered with, who Daniel had apparently been building an entire parallel life with for over a year. He told her this in the even, explanatory tone of a man delivering a business report. And with every sentence, Maya stood there in the doorway of his office feeling herself become something she had never been before, completely, utterly alone. Didn't scream, she didn't cry, not then. She did something that would become, in the months ahead, the defining choice of her life. She straightened her spine. She looked at her husband, the man she had loved, the man she had chosen. The man who had chosen her right back until he decided to choose someone else instead, and she said, very calmly, "I want you out of this house by Sunday." And then she walked down the hall to their bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, her hands folded over her stomach, and made a series of decisions. The divorce was filed within the month. Daniel, to his credit, did not contest it, or at least, he did not contest it initially. He had, she suspected, been hoping she would be emotional and irrational, the kind of woman whose grief could be managed and redirected while he quietly arranged things in his favor. He did not fully understand, yet, who he was dealing with. Maya's first call the morning after was not to a friend or a family member, it was to a lawyer. Specifically, to a woman named Patricia Okoye, who had been recommended by a colleague as someone who was, in Patricia's own words, extraordinarily thorough, and completely without mercy in a courtroom. Maya liked her immediately. The divorce proceedings revealed something that Daniel had apparently assumed Maya didn't know, that a significant portion of the growth of Whitmore and Associates over the past 3 years had been built on a business strategy that Maya had developed and informally advised on during the early years of their marriage. During those evenings when they would sit at the dining room table with his company files spread out between them, and she would tell him what she saw and what she would do. She had never been compensated. She had never been credited. She had never signed anything that acknowledged her contribution, which meant that his lawyers initially argued she was entitled to nothing beyond standard marital asset division. Patricia Okoye found the emails. 3 years of emails in which Daniel had written to his business partner, in specific and detailed terms, about strategies that were unmistakably Maya's ideas she had articulated at that dinner table. Concepts she had explained in the language of someone who had spent a decade in the field. Emails in which he had occasionally even used her exact phrasing without quotation marks, as though her thoughts had simply become his dot. It was intellectual theft executed over the course of a marriage, and it was documented, in his own words, in his own inbox. The settlement was not what Daniel had expected. It was not. Maya would reflect later, fully what she deserved. The law is a blunt instrument, and even Patricia, with all her thoroughness, could only extract so much through official channels, but it was enough. Enough to keep her apartment after Daniel moved out. Enough to cover the hospital bills. Enough to give her a foundation, thin and precarious, but real, from which to begin again. She was 7 months pregnant and starting over, and the world she was about to discover had many opinions about that. The first rejection came from a boutique financial consulting firm she had worked with years before her marriage. She had maintained a relationship with them informally over the years, and when she reached out to inquire about returning in some capacity, their response was warm, friendly, and ultimately hollow. We'd love to reconnect perhaps after things settle down for you, after things settle down. Meaning, after she was no longer pregnant. Meaning, come back when you are less inconvenient. She understood, and she moved on. The second rejection came from a former colleague who had always spoken admiringly of her work and who had reached out to her just 18 months earlier about a potential partnership opportunity. Now, when she followed up on that conversation, he was busy. Very busy. Maybe next quarter. When the baby would be here and the so-called instability of a pregnant woman would have transformed into the different, equally problematic instability, in some people's minds, of a new mother. There would always be a reason that she understood this too, and she moved on. The third rejection was the one that changed everything. Vertex Strategic Group was a mid-sized business consulting and technology integration firm that had been growing aggressively over the past 5 years. Maya knew their work had followed their trajectory with professional admiration, had noted the areas where she thought they were making mistakes and the areas where they were genuinely ahead of the curve. When she saw the posting for a senior strategy director, a role that aligned so precisely with her expertise that it almost felt designed for her, she spent 3 days preparing the most comprehensive application of her career. The interview was scheduled for a Thursday morning at 10. She arrived at 12 minutes early. The lobby was all glass and light, the kind of deliberately impressive space that says, "We have arrived to everyone who walks through the door." The receptionist, young, immaculate, professionally warm, checked her name, smiled, offered her water, and then allowed her gaze to travel downward for just a moment before traveling back up with the practiced neutrality of someone who has been trained not to say what they are thinking. She was kept waiting for 35 minutes when she was finally shown into the conference room. There were 3 people sitting across the table. The HR director, whose name Maya never learned because she never introduced herself. A man named Garrett, who was apparently the head of the department. And at the center of the table, in the chair that commanded the room, the way its occupant clearly believed he commanded every room he entered, sat Marcus Lawn, 40-3, self-made, founder and CEO of Vertex Strategic Group, the kind of man who had built something real through a combination of genuine intelligence and an absolute, weaponized certainty that his judgment was correct and others were fortunate to benefit from it. Maya had read about him. She had respected what he had built. She had prepared extensively for the possibility of meeting him. She had not prepared for the look on his face when she walked in. He was not hostile. It was something almost worse than hostile. It was the look of a man who has already reached a conclusion and is merely tolerating the formality of the process that leads up to it. A slight contraction around the eyes, a fractional straightening of posture that communicated to anyone paying attention, not respect, but wariness. The kind of wariness that has nothing to do with who you are and everything to do with what you represent to someone who has already decided you are a problem. The interview lasted 22 minutes. In those 22 minutes, Maya answered every question with the precision and depth of someone who had spent a decade mastering this field. She referenced specific market analyzers, named methodologies by their technical terms, described case studies from her own career that demonstrated exactly the kind of thinking the role required. She was, objectively, exceptional. She knew it, and she suspected that Garrett, at least, knew it too. She could see it in the slight forward lean of his body, the way his pen moved across his notepad, the particular quality of his attention. Marcus Lawn spent a significant portion of the interview looking at his phone. When it was over, he stood, shook her hand with the brisk efficiency of a man dismissing someone, and said, "We'll be in touch." The HR director emailed her 4 days later. "After careful consideration, we have decided to move forward with other candidates whose experience more closely aligns with our current needs." Her experience, which was documented across 10 years of verifiable work, which exceeded the minimum qualifications for the role by a margin that should have made her the obvious choice. Her experience was not the issue. The issue was visible and round and 7 months old. And everyone in that room had seen it and made the same calculation. And none of them would ever say so out loud. Maya read the email sitting in the apartment that the divorce settlement had allowed her to keep in the chair by the window that she had always loved, with her hand resting on her stomach where her daughter had been moving all morning with a restless, purposeful energy of someone who had somewhere important to be. She read the email twice, and then she set down her phone, and she allowed herself exactly 15 minutes to feel everything: the humiliation, the exhaustion, the particular rage that comes from being underestimated by people who are not qualified to underestimate you. She'll let herself feel it fully, the way you have to let yourself feel things if you don't want them to calcify somewhere inside you and become something harder and more damaging. 15 minutes, and then she opened her laptop and began to work. Her daughter was born on a Tuesday, 6 weeks after the Vertex rejection, at 4:17 in the morning, after 14 hours of labor that Maya endured with her mother holding one hand and Patricia Okoye, who had become, improbably and wonderfully, something like a friend, holding the other. She named her Ellie, Eleanor Maya Collins, because Maya had gone back to her own name the moment the divorce was finalized, because that name was hers and it had always been hers and no one was taking it from her again. Ellie was 7 pounds, 4 ounces, and looked at the world from her very first moments with the wide, unblinking seriousness of someone taking careful notes. "She's going to be trouble," Maya's mother said, and meant it as the highest possible compliment. Maya looked at her daughter's face, this face that was entirely new and entirely familiar, this face that was the one genuinely good thing to come out of the wreckage of the past year, and made her a silent promise. "I will not let them win. Not for me. But for you, absolutely not." The next 18 months were the hardest of Maya's life. And also, in ways she could not have predicted, the most clarifying. She freelanced. She consulted on a project-by-project basis, taking whatever work she could find that she could do from home in the hours when Ellie slept, which were less hours than any parenting book had prepared her for. She was good at it. She was very good at it, and word traveled slowly through the particular underground network of referrals that operates beneath the formal economy, the one built on someone mentioning to someone else that they know, someone who is extraordinary and available. She also, during this time, began to invest. It was not a large sum that she started with. The settlement money was finite, and she was careful with it, perhaps more careful than she had ever been with money in her life, because it was all there was and it had to last. But she had spent 10 years understanding how businesses moved, where value was hidden, where the ground was shifting beneath companies that didn't yet know they were in trouble. And she had, during the months of sleepless nights and quiet hours while Ellie napped and the apartment was still, been doing research. There was a small software company that was being consistently undervalued by the market because it was in a sector that large investors found unglamorous. Maya had looked at its fundamentals for 6 weeks and concluded, with the certainty of someone who understood what she was looking at, that it was one of the most solid small-cap investments available. She bought a modest stake. She was right. There was a commercial real estate development in a district that most analysts had written off, but that Maya, having studied the municipal planning documents and the demographic data and the infrastructure investment pipeline, believed was about to become something. She invested. She was right again. There was a healthcare technology startup that had been struggling to gain traction because its leadership was technically brilliant and commercially incompetent. Maya reached out to them directly, offered her services as a strategy consultant in exchange for a small equity stake, spent 4 months repositioning their market approach, and watched the company's valuation triple within a year. She was not becoming wealthy. Not yet. She was building, quietly, methodically, with the patience of someone who has stopped expecting anyone to hand her anything and has simply decided to construct what she needs herself. Meanwhile, Daniel had married Rachel. Maya knew this because her mother had seen the engagement announcement on social media and told her. With the particular combination of outrage and sympathy that mothers specialize in, Maya had absorbed the information without allowing herself to feel anything she wasn't ready to feel. And then she had gone back to her laptop and continued working. The child had a father who paid his child support on time, because Patricia had made very clear what the alternative would look like, and who saw Ellie every other weekend with the slightly uncomfortable attention of a man who loves his child but doesn't quite know what to do with her. Ellie, who was, by this point, a walking, talking, opinionated small person with her mother's eyes and an alarming aptitude for numbers, seemed to regard her father with a cheerful tolerance that Maya found both endearing and quietly devastating. Life continued. Maya worked. Ellie grew. The investments compounded. And then came the day when Maya's research led her somewhere she had not planned to go. She had been tracking Vertex Strategic Group for a while, not obsessively, not emotionally, but with the detached professional attention she gave to any company that was doing interesting things in her industry. And what her research was beginning to reveal was that Vertex Strategic Group, for all its aggressive growth and Marcus Lawn's carefully cultivated reputation as a visionary, was quietly in trouble. The growth had been real, but it had also been expensive, funded by a combination of investor capital and increasingly aggressive leverage that left the company more exposed than its public-facing numbers suggested. Two of its largest clients had quietly departed in the past year, taking their contracts to a competitor. The technology platform that was supposed to be Vertex's key differentiator had gone significantly over budget and over timeline, creating a cash flow problem that the company was managing through a series of increasingly complex financial maneuvers. And Marcus Lawn, whose management style had always been described in industry publications as intense and demanding, and apparently crossed some threshold in the past 18 months, because 3 senior executives had departed, and the rumor circulating in the professional community that Maya moved through was that the environment had become genuinely toxic. None of this was public knowledge. It was the kind of thing you knew if you paid attention, if you talked to the right people, if you understood how to read the space between the lines of a quarterly report. Maya paid attention. Maya talked to the right people. Maya understood exactly how to read those spaces. She spent 2 weeks building a model, then she made some calls, then she had a conversation with a private equity contact who had been a client during her consulting days, and who had occasionally, over the years, mentioned that he wished there were more people like her in the investment world. "I have something for you to look at," she said. He looked at it. 40-8 hours later, he called her back. "Tell me more about the turnaround strategy," he said. The acquisition process took 4 months. It was complex, it was confidential, and it was executed with the kind of quiet precision that Maya had spent her entire career developing. The private equity group provided the capital. Maya provided the strategy, the analysis, and the operational vision. The deal structure gave her a significant equity stake and, upon completion of the acquisition, the role of chief executive officer of the reconstituted company. The outgoing CEO, Marcus Lawn, was the last to know. This was deliberate. By the time the acquisition was formally announced, by the time Marcus Lawn sat across a conference table from lawyers and investment bankers and was informed that his company had been purchased and that he was being offered a brief transition consultant role that everyone in the room knew he would refuse, he did not immediately know who had bought it. The acquiring entity was structured through a holding company, as these things often are. He found out when Maya walked through the door. She had thought about this moment. She would be dishonest if she said she hadn't. She had thought about what she would wear. She chose a suit, charcoal gray, a cut that was precise and authoritative, and she had thought about what she would say. And she had thought about what she would feel, what she actually felt, standing in the doorway of the same conference room, where 22 minutes of her life had been dismissed without consequence, was something quieter and more complex than satisfaction. It was the feeling of a circle closing, of a story that had been written in someone else's handwriting for too long finally coming back under her control. Marcus Lawn stared at her for a long moment. She watched the sequence of recognitions move across his face, the initial blankness, then the dawning familiarity, then the particular expression of a man realizing that the person he is looking at is not who he expected and is certainly not who he would have chosen. "You were here before," he said. It wasn't a question. About 2 years ago, Maya said. You interviewed me for the senior strategy director position, 22 minutes. She paused. You spent a portion of it on your phone. The silence in the room was extraordinary. I'm Maya Collins, she said. I'm the new owner of this company, and we have quite a lot to discuss. What followed was not simple. Buying a company is one thing, turning one around is another entirely, and Vertex's problems were real and deep and required the full force of everything Maya had spent her career learning. She worked in the way that she had always worked, completely, intelligently, with a kind of focused intensity that is either inspiring or terrifying depending on where you're standing. She rebuilt the senior leadership team, starting with 3 women whose expertise she had been watching for years and who arrived at their first staff meeting with a barely concealed energy of people who have been waiting a long time to work, somewhere that deserved them. She restructured the debt. She renegotiated the technology platform contract and brought in a new technical lead who accomplished in 3 months what the previous team had failed to achieve in a year. She called 2 of the departed clients personally, and one of them came back. Garrett, the department head who had leaned forward during her interview, whose pen had moved across the notepad, came to her office in her 3rd week and sat down and said, I want you to know that I argued against that decision. The one, 2 years ago, I was overruled. Maya looked at him for a moment. I know, she said. I could tell. For what it's worth, he said. I'm glad you're here. It's worth something, she said. Now tell me about the Henderson account, because numbers don't make sense to me and I want to understand why. She kept Garrett. He was good at his job. Then she had not built a career on punishing people for other people's decisions. Marcus Lorne refused a transition role, as expected. He cleaned out his office on a Thursday and was gone by noon. Maya heard, some months later, that he had started a new venture. She wished him, genuinely if distantly, the moderate success of someone who has learned something important. Whether he had actually learned it was not her concern. The day the company's first quarterly report under her leadership was released, the day the numbers came out and told a story of stabilization, repositioning, and early-stage growth that exceeded what most analysts had predicted, Maya was sitting in her office at 7 in the morning with a cup of coffee and her daughter's most recent drawing taped to the wall where she could see it. Ellie was for now, with opinions about everything and a habit of narrating her own activities in the 3rd person. That was either concerning or brilliant. The drawing was of what appeared to be a large orange animal. That's you, Mommy, Ellie had explained. You're a lion, and it was, Maya had decided, the best piece of art she had ever owned. Her phone rang. It was Patricia. Have you seen the report? I wrote the report, Patricia. Have you seen what people are saying about it? There are 3 industry publications already. They're calling it one of the most impressive turnarounds in the sector in 5 years. Maya was quiet for a moment. They rejected me because I was pregnant, she said. That's it. That's the whole reason. I walked in there completely qualified. And they saw my stomach and they made a decision in 30 seconds and they will never say that out loud. But that's what happened. I know, Patricia said. I'm not telling you something you don't know. She paused. I want to make sure I don't forget it. Because it would be easy to let the ending of the story make the beginning feel less real than it was. And it was real. All of it was real. It was real. Patricia agreed. And you're still here. I'm still here. She did not give a speech about it. She did not hold a press conference or write an essay or grant the interviews that a few journalists requested when the story of the acquisition and the turnaround began to circulate in business circles with a narrative that was, she supposed, irresistible. The rejected pregnant applicant who bought the company. It was a clean story, a satisfying one, the kind that gets shared because people need to believe that this kind of ending is possible. She understood the appeal. She even believed in the appeal. But she was not interested in becoming a symbol or a parable or a cautionary tale aimed at people like Marcus Lorne, though she suspected the story was functioning as all 3 of those things, regardless of her preferences. What she was interested in was the work, the actual, daily, particular work of building something that was worth building. She launched an initiative within the company, small at first, then more formal, focused on supporting professional re-entry for women who had taken career gaps for caregiving, pregnancy, or family reasons. She worked with the HR function to revise hiring practices in ways that were, she was careful to ensure, legally appropriate and operationally sound. Because she had not survived this long by being naive about how institutions work. She hired people based on their demonstrable capabilities and nothing else, and she held every hiring manager accountable to that standard in concrete. measurable ways. She did not announce any of this as a grand gesture. She did it because it was the right way to build something worth having. Ellie was 5 when she came to the office for the first time. A bring your child to work day that the HR team had organized and that Maya had approved and then half forgot that until she arrived that morning to find her daughter installed behind her desk, turning the large executive chair in slow circles with an expression of profound satisfaction. "This is my office now," Ellie announced. "Is it?" "Yes, I'm the boss, you're 5. Ellie considered this briefly. "I'm almost 5.5, she said, with the tone of someone presenting a decisive counter-argument. Maya sat in the chair across from her own desk, the chair where she had sat with Garrett, with clients, with the private equity partners, with the various people who had come through this room in the past year, with things to ask and problems to solve, and looked at her daughter spinning in the chair that had, in one form or another, been a long time coming. "You know," she said, "someone sat in that chair before me who didn't think very much of me." Ellie stopped spinning. I don't know, exactly. Sometimes people decide things about you before they've given you a fair chance. Before they've actually seen what you can do. "That's dumb," Ellie said. With the serene moral clarity of a 5-year-old. "It is," Maya agreed. "It is exactly that." "What did you do?" Maya thought about it, about the hotel hallway outside Daniel's office, about the email from Vertex, about the 14 months in the lobby and the 22-minute interview, and the particular way grief feels when you are holding it very carefully so it doesn't spill and wreck things you can't afford to wreck. She thought about all of it. And she thought about how to say something true to a child who was still at the age where truth could be simplified without being distorted. "I kept going," she said. "I kept working. I kept believing that I knew what I was capable of, even when no one else did. And eventually, I built something that proved it." Ellie looked at her with the wide, unblinking seriousness that she had brought into the world on that Tuesday morning at 4:17. The same expression she had worn from her very first breath, as though she had always understood that the world required careful attention. "Okay," she said, and then she started spinning again. Maya thought about Marcus Lauren sometimes, not often. And not with bitterness, but with a particular quality of reflection that is less about the other person and more about what they represent. He had looked at her and seen a liability. He had seen a pregnant woman and performed, in the space of a breath, the unconscious calculation that so many people perform, the assumption that vulnerability is permanent, that need is weakness, that a woman in a waiting room with a visible pregnancy is at the end of something rather than the beginning. He'd been so confident, so utterly certain of his own judgment, and his certainty had cost him everything, his company, his legacy in that sector, the respect of the people who had worked for him and found better places to be, and hers had cost her nothing. Not in the end, she knew that wasn't entirely true. That the year of grief and rejection and sleepless nights and the particular loneliness of being in that lobby with her resume and her daughter and no one in the room willing to see her, clearly had cost her something real. Well, there is no cost that is zero. There is no version of that story where the injustice becomes retroactively minor because of how it ends. But here was what she also knew. She was still here. She had built something that was genuinely good, a company that worked, that treated its people well, that did excellent work for its clients, and was known in the industry for both. She had raised a child who spun in office chairs and declared herself boss with the easy confidence of a person who has never been taught to make herself small. She had learned, through the worst of it, that the thing that makes you dangerous is not the moment when everything is going right. It is the moment when everything is going wrong and you refuse to stop. She had refused to stop. That was the whole story, really. Or the rest, the betrayal and the rejection and the acquisition and the quarterly reports and the industry, the profiles, all of it was just detail layered onto that single, fundamental fact. She had been told, in 100 ways, by a dozen different people, that she was not enough. Not enough to be a wife worth keeping. Not enough to be an employee worth hiring. Not enough to be taken seriously in a room full of people who had never built a fraction of what she had built and never would. And she had looked at all of it, all the evidence that she should be smaller, quieter, more accommodating, more willing to wait, and she had decided, quietly and without ceremony, that she disagreed. She had been right. On the second anniversary of the acquisition, Maya did something she had been thinking about for a while. She called the whole company together, all 147 employees, in the large open space on the main floor that they used for all-hands meetings. And she stood up at the front of the room and said something she had not planned to say. Exactly. but that came out with the simple directness of something that has been waiting to be said. 2 years ago, she said, I was in this building as a job applicant. I was 7 months pregnant and I had 10 years of experience and I was not hired. Most of you don't know that story. Some of you do. She paused. I'm not telling it to make a point about the people who made that decision. I'm telling it because I want you to understand something about what this company is now and what I intended to be. The room was very still. Every person in this room is here because of what they can do, she said. Not because of what they look like or where they are in their life or what is happening at home. Not because of anything except their work and their judgment and their willingness to do both as well as they possibly can. That is the only thing we evaluate here, and it is the only thing that ever will be. Because I know what it costs when that's not the standard. And I will not run a company that extracts that cost from anyone. She looked out at the room at the 147 people who had come to work that morning in a building that 2 years ago had been failing and now was not. In a company that had a culture that had not existed before she built it. She said, go back to work. There was a moment of silence, and then someone started clapping. And then the whole room was clapping. And Maya stood there at the front of it and felt something she had not expected to feel. Not triumph, exactly, but something deeper and quieter. The feeling of a person who has arrived somewhere they were always supposed to be. By a road they would not have chosen, but that turned out to be the only road that led here. Later that evening, she picked up Ellie from her mother's house, and they drove home together through the city with the windows down and the radio playing something that Ellie sang along to with total commitment and complete disregard for the actual melody, and Maya drove and listened and thought about none of it, not Daniel, not Marcus Lawn, not the lobby or the interview or the email or the settlement or the 14 months or any of it. She just drove. She was here. She had built this, the city moved past the windows and her daughter sang, and the road was clear ahead, and that was enough. It was, she thought, more than enough. It was everything. The women who are dismissed as inconvenient have a long memory, and a longer vision. They are not waiting for permission. They are not asking to be believed. They are building, quietly, in the hours that are given to them, towards something the people who dismiss them will one day have to reckon with, not out of anger, not for revenge, simply because that is what they were always going to do, and nothing, not betrayal, not rejection, not the particular cruelty of being made to feel invisible, nothing could ever change that. Maya Collins knew this. She had known it all along.